Welcome back, after seems like an eternity, to the good, the bad, and the orange. We're here today, Bill McCartney and I. Bill joined our group, gosh, it's been a year?
Yeah, about a year.
About a year ago. Has quite a impressive background. He's was a agent, team leader, branch manager, regional vice president, grand poobah, I'm not sure what else, with in New York. So he's joined the Arizona real estate market, which I'm sure you're finding a little different.
It is, yeah.
But there's obviously lots of people from the East Coast moving this way. But I like Bill because he has an immense amount of knowledge and study and a great perspective. And of course, me, I'm wearing orange, so that's really all that matters. So I think one of the biggest questions we've run into, or mainly with buyers, is it a good time to buy in the marketplace? And oh, that we had our crystal balls that we had back in the 80s and 90s. But timing the market, and I think if you talk to people in stock markets or buying anything, it's hard to time the market. I just bought a new car 30 days ago, and about last week or the week before, I bought a Ford, and Ford then came out with employee pricing, and I said, gosh, if I'd have waited 30 days, I even talked to the guy who hooked me up, and he said, yeah, so it goes.
Yeah, exactly.
Timing is, you can't time everything, but
well, you wouldn't have had a car for 30 days.
I wouldn't have. I would have wasted money renting, or I've been driving the van around or something crazy. So timing the market, it's one of the things that I think everyone looks for. They're looking for what's the right rate, are prices going to fall, are tariffs going to cause me to lose my job, or affordability. I mean, there's so many questions. Where do we start?
Well, I think that's a pretty good start, because that's what's going through a lot of people's minds today.
Yep.
And I think if you look back, most recently it's the tariffs, it's the stock market, it's a change of administration. Prior to that, though, it was an election year, so people were kind of waiting for that. Before that, it was interest rates, and maybe they'll come down. So I think there's always reasons to wait, or there's the reason people do wait, not that there's a good reason to wait, necessarily, because when you look at the data, it just doesn't necessarily make sense.
I agree. Yeah. We always talked about the best time to buy a house is when you need to make a move.
Right.
We look historically, you and I were talking earlier about, we think of all the people who bought in 06, the first part of 07, and then we fell into the abyss, and everyone said, I'll never sell my house for what I paid for it. And if we look back, history and trends are a wonderful thing, and they show that those people are way ahead on their houses, and we're after actually a few years they're at least broken even. So those events are such a small part of history when you look at buying real estate, especially if it's your primary residence.
Right.
And timing, for them was because I needed a house, or because it was easy to buy, or whatever that was at that time. And so we're in that same place today. People seem to want to wait, but I don't even know what they're really waiting for. I think it's that fear factor, maybe.
Well, yeah, and I think, too, if you look at it from just one perspective, where it's the value of that property today versus what it might be 3, 5, 10 years from now, you need to look at the entire picture, right? It's not just the property that you'd be buying. It's what would it cost you in rent, for that 3, 5, or 10-year period. And I think when you add that up, and know that, like, once you leave that apartment, or rental, what do you have to show for it?
Nothing. You've paid someone else's mortgage payment.
Correct.
The cliched line.
Yeah, so I like to actually, if you do the math, right, what's the average cost of a rental today? 3-bedroom, 2-bath house.
$3,000 probably. I mean, it's getting there.
Yeah, and then what would that house cost if somebody wanted to buy it?
Now you're asking me to get my mortgage calculator out.
Well, no, just not monthly payment wise. What would the value of a home
house,
that look like?
The 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. Well, depending on where you bought, but you look at North Phoenix, or maybe step out of Scottsdale, but North Phoenix or Cave Creek, or go west, you can buy that house for $300,000, 350, maybe it's 400, if you're looking at some of the new build incentives. And so
Right.
there's a lot of opportunity to buy right now where you're going to get that full tax write-off and you own it. So
Yeah,
it's your yard.
But here's my point. So let's say it's even $500,000. Now, people are worried. If they're worried that the values will come down, let's say you buy a house today and it's $500,000. Well, what if it drops 10% within the next year or two?
Yeah.
They feel like they've lost $50,000 in equity. And in a sense, you have, right? But if you think about what you've spent in rent, $3,000 a month, it's $36,000 a year. And in just 3 years, you would have paid close to $100,000 in rent.
Plus the tax benefit, which,
Right.
maybe people can't quantify that when they do this, but the simple numbers alone say, there's $100,000 I gave up.
Yeah.
To coin a phrase from our technician, Andy Vocal on the side, his dad says, I haven't lost any money in the market because I haven't sold anything.
Well, there you go.
And that's the other thing you think about. So if you bought a house today, unless you're buying it to flip, different buyer, but let's say I'm buying my house to live in. Stats say you're going to be there probably 5 years, maybe more. I mean, it's that length of time people are staying in their houses is going longer.
Right.
But even if you say it's 3 to 5 years, again, the historical trends say you're going to be money ahead in so many different ways.
Yeah. And, the other thing to consider too is you're fixing your monthly payment, right?
Yes.
So I don't know if anybody's aware of this or they read this, but I read a lot. And last year in 2024, we had a record number of evictions. Now, these were people that were renting. And think about somebody who's been in that rent cycle in the last 5 years. They've seen their rent go up in double digits
Yes.
in some cases, right? So, like percentage-wise. So you just don't have the ability then to save and get in. So by buying a home, you're actually fixing your housing payment because your interest rate's not changing unless you're in a variable rate. Your taxes might change, your HOA fees might change, but it has a less of effect than if you were renting and having to move every year, trying to find more affordable housing. So buying that house long-term is a really good way to, I think, build wealth. Every
Move costs money, time, which I think we all forget. Having just moved, I'm supposed to be recommending this to people. You should move.
Right.
But, the boxes and the sorting and the, disruption and making sure the mail's changed. And I mean, it goes on and on and
the
on.
expense.
And the expense,
Yeah.
yes. But so what is different to you about New York real estate and Arizona real estate?
Well, the biggest difference is that it's an attorney state in New York, right? Which coming here was a little bit of a unique experience because here agents write the contract, which I think is fantastic because having control over that transaction and the less people involved actually creates a more seamless experience for the
Yep.
clients too. What's different though is that in New York, it's a buyer beware state. It's a little bit different here. And there, like from an agency perspective, right? Like here you have representation for the buyer, you have representation for the seller, and it's really rare that you have an unrepresented buyer unless
Yep.
somebody really doesn't want to be represented. And of course, we make them sign like 10 different forms that say, you
no
sure?
kidding. We have a
You
whole
know?
library of those.
Right, exactly. So in New York, though, you could have that customer relationship in a different way. And I guess for me, coming here, it was kind of like, well, why can't you have that here? And then it occurred to me because they don't have an attorney who's reviewing at least the contract with them and protecting their interests on some level.
True, that really falls on their agent and that whole trust piece.
Right.
It's funny you talk about unrepresented buyers. Of course, Warren Buffett, the fearless leader of Home Services of America, says, price is what you pay, value is what you get. And in real estate, in our industry, for our profession, that has never been truer. There are agents who don't represent their clients very well and are transactional maybe or don't understand the contracts. But I look at it as if I give them good advice and steer them in the right directions and bring in the experts when we need to, there's a cost of doing that, but you're buying your biggest asset, so why wouldn't you want to have some representation?
Sure.
And frankly, our contracts are so uniform. That's probably the best part.
Right. And that is different about New York as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that a little bit with, the little changes in NAR, where we've had couple of brokerages decide they're going to write their own forms. And doesn't mean they're right or wrong. It just means that now they have to go under a whole nother level of scrutiny. And I think that can be, daunting for a buyer, even if they were an attorney.
Sure.
If you're not a real estate attorney dealing with real estate forms all the time, there's all these little nuances that we seem to see that when you change a contract, it's usually for some sort of convenience or omission of something that someone doesn't like, and
Right.
usually that's there to protect somebody.
Sure.
So anyhow, I agree with you. So I came from Minnesota originally, and I thought, real estate, Minnesota, Arizona, same thing, fly back and forth. It'll be great. It'll be fish in the summers and golf in the winters. And but even even though we have a lot more similarities, we're close at the table state there, or they are there. So, everyone sits around the table and in that awkward moment for an hour and 15 minutes while they're running copies and
The seller and buyer in the same room.
yeah, and the buyer's agents and the mortgage guy and usually sometimes two escrow officers because everyone can have their own. And
Oh, wow.
and you got to make small talk, and if it didn't go well, then everyone's kind of squirming. But
Sure.
A lot of the similarities though in contract. I mean the periods for inspection and so forth. But when it gets to closing, I think the biggest difference here, of course, is we're an escrow state. So sign ahead of time,
Yeah.
and wire in the money, and when everyone's done what they're supposed to do, it closes.
Well,
And
you know what's one of the other really big differences between New York and Arizona is the inspection. There is no inspection period, post-contract in New York. So all of the inspections done prior to contract, meaning that you need to invest, with somebody to take a look at that property, make sure it's something that you want to buy.
without contract.
Before you're signing a contract. And that also means that a seller, because you're not obligated to that home, well, nor is the seller obligated to you. So it happens quite frequently, actually, especially in these appreciating markets where people are jumping over each other, to get into homes where there's a lack of inventory, where you can have an acceptable offer, they would call it, set up your inspection. And then even if you've had your inspection, you get a call that afternoon. It's like, well, guess what? The seller just went with a higher offer. So you've just invested money to have this home inspected, and now you're out. Because those inspections, again, it's a buyer beware state, but they're not necessarily required of the buyer. So it's, there's no retribution, so to speak, to get that money back from that seller. I mean, it's an ethical and right thing to do in my mind, but the seller has no obligation to refund the money to that buyer.
Boy, isn't that interesting? That does
Isn't
make
it?
it for a little more interesting.
Imagine the emotions involved in that kind of transaction,
No wonder New York people yell a lot.
right?
Bill doesn't.
I don't
He
know.
claims he does. He says he's another side to him, but
Right.
I don't
Once
know.
I hang up the phone, I'm like, what? No.
So what's the oddest thing you've seen in a real estate showing transaction? What's the weirdest thing you've seen?
Well, you familiar with sovereign citizens?
Sovereign citizens.
Yeah.
I don't think I am.
So they claim to not be under the jurisdiction of the United States laws, right? They kind of
Okay.
have their own laws. So I was managing an office on Long Island, and I get a call from an agent. She says, I have a problem. She says, I have this buyer that I showed a home to, and he won't leave the house, and he's claiming that it's now his. So it turns into calling the cops, and of course I said, well, put yourself in your car. Nothing's more important than your safety, right? Lock the doors, call the police. So the police came and they removed him from the home. But his idea was that, this flyer that she gave him, this information sheet from the MLS, was in effect a contract, and said he is now the owner of this house, as well as the car in the garage, which was a beautiful Maserati. So, that was, I think, the strangest experience that I ever had in real estate. That was one that kind of was like, wow.
Makes me think of what was the movies with one cop was Riggs. Guys thinking about, they were
Oh, yeah,
the two
yeah.
cops.
Yeah, Danny Glover.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Well, anyhow, there was one where the bad guy would whip out and go, diplomatic immunity.
Right.
And in the end, They just shot him. But,
There you go.
So, but it was the same kind of thing. It's like, oh, I can't do
Right, we're not
anything. 'cause-
promoting violence by
No,
any
we're not.
means.
No, don't shoot anybody. What are you saying, Andy?
Lethal weapon.
Lethal weapon.
Yeah.
You can speak up. We want, and all the good shows, the guy on the side has color commentary, and that should be you.
Well, the 80s was a different time period.
It was. 80s
Yeah.
was a beautiful time.
Yeah.
Well, mine was not maybe as glamorous as that. You were
Okay.
dealing international, well, you were dealing with people out of their mind, I guess.
Oh, no,
But-
these are local people
Oh.
that just had a different interpretation of their sovereignty.
So I had a house listed for a physician, and our deal was on showings, because he was actually a surgeon. He worked, weird hours, and so if I called and he didn't answer, it was okay to show.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go show his house, and we're walking around to show the pool in the back, and there he is, sun tanning, naked.
I had a feeling.
Yeah, and so he stands up, waves
Oh.
in all his glory, and I just said, "Move along, nothing to see here."
Yeah.
And so we coined him Naked Hank after that, but. I haven't seen any dead bodies or anything like that. I mean, I've seen we've seen all sorts of
Sure.
trash and all sorts of crazy stuff, but it can be an interesting business, to say the least.
Absolutely.
So you and your wife travel,
Yes.
so we never know where Bill is. All of a sudden, Bill's been gone for a while. I wonder where he is. And he came in, gave us that notice in the beginning that he's going to be enjoying life, but didn't want to be bored. And
So
so,
I still love what I do, love helping
Yeah.
people, and that's really important.
and that's really what this industry is. Either you
Yeah.
love it or pick another industry.
I think you have to love it.
Yeah.
Because what we deal with on a daily basis, those odd stories are kind of unique in their own way, but, the daily grind of this business can wear on the average person. Yeah.
What do you think the biggest challenge is for our industry today? Let's
Right
talk
now?
locally. I mean,
Locally?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
because, it's one thing to talk about national, but that doesn't really,
I think, right now, the biggest challenge, if you think about agents and their tenure in the business,
Yep.
right? Having somebody who's experienced and kind of seen the ups and downs in markets, I think has the ability to help that client, whether it's a buyer or a seller or somebody who's looking to even invest in real estate, to navigate that market in a slightly different way than maybe somebody who's only been in the business for 5 or 6 years.
right.
Because that agent that's in the business 5 or 6 years, they've only seen the market go in one direction, right? So it's kind of like, think about it as like an oval racetrack, right? When things are going in a certain direction and you have certainty, you basically just have to put your foot to the floor and go as fast as you possibly can because you know where you're going.
Is that true, Andy? Andy, being a racing
Yeah, yeah.
professional?
That's accurate.
Okay.
And where do drivers make their money? It's on the turn, right? So as things begin to shift in the market, having somebody who has that experience that can help to guide you and understand what that means for you in your own specific situation, because it's specific to everybody, I think is invaluable. And now, there's a statistic, and I think it's 2/3 of all sellers only interview one agent before hiring them. And I believe that they should really, especially now that we have this agreement thing, even on the buy side, nationally. But I think you really should be interviewing 2 or 3 agents to really get a better sense as to not just, who your friend is, right? Because you already like them and trust them, but are they really the best person to get your home sold? Are they the best person to navigate you through the complexities of a real estate transaction? Because we try to make them as easy as possible for our clients, but things come up.
It is.
Yeah.
And even on the flip side of that, so some people say, I'm just going to list with our cousin Eddie because,
Right.
he got his license and I feel bad for him because he's working at Denny's and this will help him get a real estate deal done. But sometimes hiring someone a friend or family is tough because real estate has some tough decisions to make.
Yeah.
And if you can't get candid conversation, you're really not going to get trusted advice.
Sure.
And, it's funny how people will say, I know so many agents, so I don't know who to pick. And I go, well, pick me because then they'll all be mad at you, but it'll be equal.
Right. Well, think of it this way. How hard is it to fire a friend?
It's hard, yes.
Yeah. And it's really uncomfortable, and you don't want to do anything to ruin that friendship. Sure, hiring somebody else, you might feel like you're ruining that friendship. But I've even had cases where, to your point, it's a monetary thing. They want to make sure that their, cousin, nephew, whoever it is, that's working at Denny's gets some money because they feel for them. And that's a great thing to do. But when it comes to selling your home and it's 5, 6, 800,000 or more, that's a pretty big investment. I'm not sure you want your cousin, the one that, to be the one that's going to handle that. And I've even said, well, why don't we do this? I'm happy to pay your cousin a referral fee so that they are compensated in some way, but at the same time, you still get the best person for the job.
Or they could just join our brokerage and be mentored.
They can do that as well.
Sorry, shameless promotion.
No, don't apologize. It's a great place to be.
It is so true, and I think the idea that one size fits all with agents is so gone away, and the more complex it gets, especially the DOJ ruling, I think for some brokerages was like, okay, we've been doing that anyhow, now we're just honing our skills. And for some who just don't have the in-depth training, and I'm not being critical, it was a lot thrown at the industry very quickly, which that's a whole nother discussion on what was the motive behind doing that, because that didn't make much sense. But, they don't always represent their client's best interest because they don't know how to. You're right on that interview. Interviewing a number of agents should give you clarity. And the last question they should be asking is, what do you charge?
Sure.
Even though that's the first one.
How much is my house worth?
All commissions are negotiable. I mean, they always have been. That's what's so interesting. This lawsuit was over price fixing in some ways. And I can tell you, as we review commission instructions daily, it doesn't matter what it was signed for in the beginning. It's really what was agreed to at the end when someone had to buy a washing machine or had to clean out a sewer or had to, who knows, pay some storage. Most good agents know they're going to be involved in that. And again, it's to not get in the way of a transaction. And that's really what can happen when you get people that aren't familiar with the ups and downs and the challenges of negotiation.
Sure. But even, just kind of going back to your point, you see the challenges in the industry now, and it's because the inventory is increasing and sellers need to do different things in order to be successful in selling that property. You really need an agent that can help them to prepare that home for sale in a way that's going to help them, give them the best opportunity to sell the home, but also position that property based on the direction of the market. And where things are going. So even just educating them on how the market works, where we feel it needs to be positioned so that we can create a positive experience for that client and get them the best price terms and conditions.
I'm a Seth Godin fan, and one of the few books in my life that I've read multiple times is This Is Marketing. Mm-hmm. And it was pretty enlightening to me, and maybe not to others, but he talked about you don't need the massive audience for anything you market. Doesn't matter what it is. You need the audience with the highest level of connection, which probably will be a very small audience. But if they're connected to that widget, in our case, property or lifestyle or whatever we're selling, you're going to sell that home faster. You're going to sell it for a higher price, and you're going to have less market time. And that's, to me, where we've really gotten in our industry is knowing how to define, first of all, who's the buyer for a property. But even with buyers, why are they buying? I mean, what's their why? It's all about what's their why. It isn't about price range or number of bedrooms. That all is secondary to why are people making a move. And, this idea that, bigger is better when it comes to, I see this in brokerages. I don't think that's true. I think having people that you can sound off ideas on and really know what questions to ask. And I think I learn every day about what's a new way to ask something. What's another thing someone might be thinking about, as opposed to what's already in my arsenal that, some of it we got to throw out every now and then or update. And
things evolve.
And they do. And sometimes buyers, I had a client the other day called me out of the blue, said, hey, we're going to buy a condo. Okay, send them some condos. And they said, we got cold on that. I said, you should right now. It wasn't like, stop. Mm-hmm. No, let's go. No, because I get to sell their house and buy a condo. But it was like, if you're not feeling comfortable, you don't need to move.
Right.
So let's just see what happens.
Yeah.
I think things will settle down. We all know, I think when we step back, we all know everything settles back down, the dust settles, the tariff thing will settle, you name it. It's all going to settle. Interest rates will settle back down after this short little blip, and, and we'll get back to normal, and then people can make decisions that are really they're kind of discretionary moves. They're not have-to moves. And that's part of our job too, is say, no, don't do it.
Yeah.
That isn't always easy to do.
It's funny. My wife, she's been in real estate in one way or another over the last 30 years herself. So she's been an agent. She's worked for a mortgage company. Now she works for a title company, and she hears me on the phone. So it's relatable to her. She's not just, like somebody who's been out of that marketplace, and she'll hear me as I'm guiding my clients. And I'm not just trying to sell them a home. I'm giving them the information they need to make a comfortable decision, that's best for themselves and their family.
Right.
And there are instances, to your point, that it's like, well, then this probably isn't the right situation for you. Let's consider looking at something different, And she's kind of like, wow, my husband really is honest, because let's face it, a lot of people in sales, and I think, realtors get this, what's the word I'm looking for?
They can get caught up in the transaction as well. I mean, or they get this, I guess, close it instinct.
Well, people think we're salespeople and we just want to make money. We're motivated by the dollar.
Yeah.
And that's the furthest thing from the truth. I mean, many agents over the years in business, and, what motivates agents. Sure, there are some that are transactional, like you said, but most agents, they're just good people. They like to help people, and that's most agents. Whether they're skilled enough or not, or have the guidance necessarily, is a different story. But they're really motivated by helping people.
It is, and you occasionally will see agents who, especially some younger ones, who have a little bit of idealism in what real estate is, and
Right.
It's letting them know you gotta have a passion for some aspect of people.
Yes.
Or you're gonna count. You're gonna do the division on how much you're making per hour on this gig, and you're gonna go. I might as well go be a Walmart greeter.
Exactly.
Because you can say hi to people and everyone's nice, and
Sure.
you make minimum wage, and that's good. But it is a people business. It's a passion business.
Yes.
Been talking to a few agents and saying, if they're feeling flat, it's apply real estate to your passion. My favorite story is when I first moved here was I was in a training, and they were talking about how there was a guy in Mesa who his passion was scuba diving.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm new to Arizona. I mean, so I've been here, but I didn't think about scuba diving in Arizona as a correlation.
Is there a lot of scuba diving in Arizona?
I think there's actually probably more of it than we know.
There are lakes.
There are the reservoirs, and they said he built this massively sustained business solely on his passion of scuba diving. Because it got back to what Seth Godin said. Find people who share, that have the highest level of connection. So Andy could be a great real estate agent just connecting with people in the race industry. Right? Unlimited amount, more than you could handle. Well, maybe you're good, but, and it's true of everybody. It's like, find your passion. Those are your people.
Right.
Now apply real estate, because you've already built trust, because you have a similar like. And that's, how we connect with clients. It's understanding what our similarities are. It's true of every time we work with people.
Well, it's funny. What motivates me, it's like, and again, it's helping people, but, my goal in life is to have a positive impact on the lives of other people.
Yep.
And for me, real estate's just a vehicle that allows me to do that, whether it be the consumer, somebody buying and selling, whether it's another agent and just kind of helping them through a transaction or something that I could be of value for. So that's really what I enjoy doing. So, yeah.
So in 3 months, it'll be July.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll be 115 degrees, probably one of those days.
Right.
Is there going to be any real estate that sells in July?
Absolutely. I ran some numbers. I gave them to Tom yesterday when he was kind of talking about it at the meeting. And I don't know if you had looked at that. but I did an analysis and I went back 10 years because I'm this like numbers guy, you know?
It's good to know a numbers guy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's good for the data. And then I like to create the visual so that I can kind of like explain it to people in a way that they can understand. But what I was looking at was what is the most active months of the year? Because people would say homes don't sell in the summer, right? So I'm not going to put my house on the market. And that is the furthest thing from the truth. So what I discovered when I looked at this was that homes sell every month of the year, right? And if you divide 12 by, you divide the months by, the percentage it would be like of the year, it's 8.33%, right? For every
Per month, yep.
Right? So the most active months were March, April, and May for pending deals, right? I'm looking at activity, pending deals. And July and August were not the least active months. The least active months were September, November, and December, oddly enough. So June, July, and August are actually relatively active months, and they might not be as active as you'd see in January or February and through May, because in the desert we have a lot of snowbirds, particularly in our marketplace. Yep. So there is more activity at that point, but there's activity all year long. And my wife and I, we bought our house July 4th weekend. We came out here, we were looking for property and said, this is where we want to be. We made a commitment and we purchased and we closed in August.
Well, my misconception when I moved here was I'd have summers off here. I could go back to Minnesota, fish and sell real estate.
Right.
And what I found is I sell as much real estate in the heat of the walked building sites and in the scorching heat, and went, what? This was not in the brochure. It must have been in the fine
Who
print.
gave you the brochure, Jay?
Right. Well, I wrote it myself.
Yeah.
Well, as we look to wrap up this first episode back, give me some sage words of wisdom on any topic you wish.
Any topic.
Any topic.
And I think it's just relative to where we are in the market now with nearing 27,000 properties in the market. It's really important to, every market's a little different. You take 85255, 262, and 266. What people don't realize is that there's been a lot more activity this first quarter of 25 than there was last year at the same time.
It is.
In 85255, we had an increase of activity by 25% over last year. 85262 was 44% higher. And in 85266, we had 40% more transactions, closed transactions. So the luxury market's doing really well. But there's something to, I think, follow in that, right? And that, if somebody who is built wealth, they're familiar with money, they're making these decisions that are, they're pretty good at managing their money probably because they have money, right?
Right.
So maybe you can learn something from this market if you're, aspiring to kind of build wealth for yourself, you're just starting out as a family. And if you've got those negative thoughts and those doubts about, buying that home and saying, should I really commit to this? Is this a good time to buy? You know what? The people with money are investing in real estate because it's a really good store of value and it hedges against inflation. You may want to follow some of that guidance too, because you may not have the money or the ability to buy the dream home today, but you can get into a home. So condos can be a really good place to start if the house you're just not quite ready for. But my suggestion or my advice is, rather than just listen to the headlines, and see what's on the news, because let's face it, they're putting these things out there to sell news, sell newspapers. Well, nobody buys newspapers anymore, but basically to sell subscriptions for their news channel. And they have a certain motivation, right? It's really important because buying a home is very individualized, based on your own circumstances. Sit down with an agent and say, what would this look like? Talk to a lender and say, I know rates are up, but what would my monthly payments be? How much can I afford? At least explore your options, because I would hate to see people get stuck in that rent cycle, and I've seen this happen.
Yeah.
My grandparents never owned a home. They rented their entire lives.
Wow.
And had they purchased a home, they would have been a lot wealthier. Their later years would have been a lot easier because you've got assets, that are worth something that you can liquidate and turn into healthcare or whatever it is that you need later on in life. There's so many different things that you can do when you're leveraging those assets. So
I agree. The looking for the indicators, that is, you were reading my mind because I think that is so spot on. Everyone talks about the market's going to crash.
Yeah.
Wealthy people don't buy when markets are going to crash, and they have as much insight as anybody. The other is the commercial real estate market. So we've got a fairly robust group that leases and sells commercial property. And when they get really busy, it sometimes is a little bit ahead of what we're doing, but that means that small business, usually, entrepreneurs are investing in their businesses. And they're not doing that because they think the market's going to go backwards. They're doing it because they're feeling bullish, irrespective of the news.
Right.
And, I think the other thing that people forget about Arizona, especially the Valley, is that our employment demographic has radically changed. I mean, it used to be we were a service industry, and that's why you'd see big ups and downs. People don't go on vacations or do things when the market's down. But right now, healthcare is our number one employer. I mean, that's a radical change. You look at all the new healthcare going along, 101, the new, I think it's Banner's building a whole new complex, and you got Mayo expanding, and then we're not even talking about the tech investments in the 20s of billions over and over and over again. And those things just add stability to our marketplace. So again, when people are apprehensive because the market might fall back, we're at a inventory level that was balanced 15 years ago or 10 years ago, not today. I mean, we're still not at a balanced inventory level. Yes, there's a lot more inventory. It feels like a lot of inventory because we had none for a while.
And it depends on where you are.
Well, that's right.
Yeah. Different price points have different balance or not. Yeah, sure.
But it's a great time to explore buying a house, explore selling a house. Like you said, talk to a good lender, get a game plan. And that will usually make it clear for people what they should or shouldn't do.
Sure.
Well, until next time, Bill will be here. We may have a guest. It's 2 weeks away, so who knows what will happen by then, because I plan way ahead.
Okay.
But thank you for listening to The Good, the Bad, and the Orange, and we'll see you next time.